Hi everyone. I'd like to talk to you today about contracts, about the business side of music making. Something that nobody in my college or graduate school experience really gave any thought to, but which is hugely important because as professional musicians, or someday professional musicians, we're all going to fall into one of three categories. We're either going to become full-time teachers in schools or colleges or something like that. We're going to become full-time ensemble players in salaried ensembles, or we're going to fall into that giant melting pot called freelancing. And what the word freelancing really translates to is contract worker. And as contract workers, it's important to realize that your working environment is only as strong as the contract that you're signed to, either with your per-service ensembles, with your performing venues, or with your clients if you run a special music business, if you run a business along the lines of weddings or receptions or things like that. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to give a shout out to the person who inspired this video blog. His name is Mike Monteiro, and he is a professional web designer out in California. And I've posted the link to his video below. Fair warning, it does include some adult themes and some adult language. The content of that video, though, was the most important professional development I've done since leaving college. And it's super important. So I unfortunately can't share the video in its entirety here because of the aforementioned language issues, among other things, but it's very useful. Go watch his video. But if you'd like to be spared the language and other things like that, I've distilled his talk a little bit and slightly refined it for the use of freelance musicians rather than designers. So, first thing to realize about providing music and about being a professional contract worker musician is that this is a business, and for you to have great business relationships with your clients, you need clear expectations, you need clear definitions, you need for there to not be any misunderstandings or any ambiguities, and you need for these things to all be explicitly stated in a contract. Generally speaking, most clients that you come into contact with and most ensembles who will contract you have the best of intentions, start out intending to start a good business relationship. But things change. You know, maybe there's a budgeting shortfall, or maybe they just decide to go in a different direction, or maybe things eventually turn south and they decide that they'd rather not use you for your services. Things change in the business relationship, contracts don't, which is why contracts are hugely important. So Mike Monteiro in his video, one of the things that he mentions is what he calls his greatest hits of bad predicaments. First thing that he mentions is if the client changes the deal too many times. If you get into a business relationship with a client and they start trying to change the music on you, or they try to change the venue, or they try to work other things into the deal, a contract should explicitly state the exact terms of employment. And if the client tries to change the contract too many times, it's time to rip up the old contract and either start a new one or say toodles to that particular client. In this way, your contract is your shield to protect your business integrity and to be able and to give you something to point to and say, no, this is what we agreed to, and I'm not willing to change from this. Next thing that Mike Monteiro says happens frequently is that the client will just say, come on, you can trust us. Walk away. As much as we do what we do for the love of the music, and as much as trust is an important part of building a business relationship, trust really is more of a personal thing. And it's important to have professional faith that a contract will be honored, but trust has no place in a professional relationship, really. this is exactly what a contract is for, so that you just met these people who are trying to contract you a matter of days ago or weeks ago or months ago, and you don't really know anything about them beyond what they've represented to you in the last couple of meetings that you had. This is what we call a first impression, and it's not always reliable. So, wanting a contract is not a matter of saying, I don't trust you, it's a matter of being realistic about, I just met you, and I need to protect my business. So, if your client says, you can trust us, your response to that is, I do trust you, and because of that trust, I want for that trust to be codified in a contract so that we all have it just down on paper and we're all just totally in the clear. Lastly, another thing that happens that Mike Monteiro cites is when the client brings in another designer. If the client brings in someone else to do work that they've already asked you to do, it's time to let go of that client, and it's time to say enough. And it's time to say to just walk away and to let that client and their new contractor deal with whatever it is they want to do, because you're representing a business and you have your own personal business standards, and if someone else comes in with their own business standards, they may not necessarily jive, and you don't want to be negotiating both with a client and also triangulating with another contractor. Just get out while you still can. Top things that you need to know about contracts. The first thing that you need to know about contracts is that a contract protects both parties. And this is key when you're trying to sell your client on signing a contract to begin with. Is that a contract states what everyone can expect. It's not designed to be one-sided. Don't start work without a contract. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that every single time you pick up your instrument you personally need to have a signed contract, because a lot of times if you're a substitute player, especially with certain ensembles, they will already have a contract. It's called the collective bargaining agreement, or sometimes it's called the master agreement, and you won't necessarily be required to sign said agreement for said agreement to still apply to you, because most master agreements and collective and CBAs will have provisions in them for substitute players. So the position of don't start work without a contract doesn't necessarily mean that you need to sign on the dotted line every single time. It just means that you need to know that somewhere you need to be covered, whether by someone else's contract or by your own. Anticipate negotiation, but don't back down on the important stuff. The biggest thing that this means is not being willing to completely devalue your own product. And one of the bigger mistakes that you can make as a contract negotiator is to say, I want $200. I want $200 for my work, and that's what I want, and I'm going to stick to that. And the client comes back and says, ugh, I really only have a budget of $120. Can you make it work? And for you to come back and say, okay, fine, I'll take $120, because then you've just lost all credibility. For this, it's important to have some sort of an itemized bill for your client so that you can come back to the client and say, okay, well, if you want $120 worth of services, here's how I can cut down what I'm offering you to fit into your budget. When you're negotiating, make sure that if the client is asking for less, that you're giving them less too. It's important to maintain a sense of self-worth, both for yourself and for the client. Be specific and confident about money. Just like I was just saying about contract negotiations and about especially the monetary side of contract negotiations, if a client comes to you and says, I want X, how much is that going to cost? If your first word is, then you've just lost yourself at least half the money that you could have potentially been making. Your answer is never, your answer is either, it'll cost you $100 for that, or $150 for that, or let me think about that and let me consider that and let me see what the costs are. I find that it's always useful to be fairly transparent with my clients when negotiating with them, telling them what the going rates are for musicians for this particular kind of service, and like I said earlier, itemizing their bill so that if they say, well, this is what my budget is, you can point to some specific things on their bill and say, Well, we can cut these specific things away, and that's how we can fit into your budget. You won't be getting everything that you wanted, but you'll be able to get most of what you wanted. And that's pretty much it when it comes to contracts with regards to the what's what of what goes into a contract and what details to pay attention to when running a business and designing contracts and things like that. Once again, Mike Monteiro's video is much more comprehensive and much more in-depth and extremely, extremely useful and kind of funny too. It's pretty interesting. I highly recommend that you go and watch it. This was just the Cliff Notes, if you will. So go watch his video, thank me later, and tune in next time for when we talk about what specifically should go in your contract. What things should you be thinking about? What haven't you thought about yet about what you need to take care of? That's that. Take care.